I love reading posts on this sub, but never thought I'd have anything to contribute. However, while listening to things on YouTube, I suddenly remembered this. I lived alone in a bad neighborhood just outside of the city. At this point, I had been living there for maybe 3 years with no incident. Well, I mean, there were several shootings on my street, but no one shot at me, so no incident, I guess. I'm the kind of person who can't sit still for very long, so I find myself standing or pacing a lot. On this particular night, maybe at about 2 a.m., I was pacing while reading a textbook to prepare for an upcoming test at my university. I stopped pacing for a little and just stood near my front door to read. That's when I heard the doorknob turn. For some reason, though I nearly shit myself, I was able to calmly look down at my deadbolt to double check that it was locked. It was. Phew. I looked through the peephole to see who was trying to come in, but no one was standing there. Obviously, this was confusing. I neither am superstitious nor a believer in the supernatural, but I'm also stupid. So, my first thought was, is a ghost really trying to break into my house? Thankfully, that thought gave way to a more logical thought of, maybe they're trying to go around back. So, I quickly moved to the back door to make sure it was locked. It was. Phew again. But then, my front doorknob turned again. I tiptoe ran to the front door. At this point, my heart is pounding. My dog, big protective teddy bear, is looking at me with major concern in his eyes. I look to the front peephole again, but there's still no one there. That's when I hear a small knock on my door. As I am looking through the peephole, then a small child's voice says,
"Let me in.
Silence.
Let me in."
I'm still looking through the peephole while covering my mouth with my hand to make my breathing quieter. Through the peephole, I see a small 3-year-old-ish girl walk to the edge of my porch and look into my bushes. She nods and then says,
"Okay,"
in what I think was supposed to be a whisper. She walks closer to the door again, and I lose sight of her in the peephole. She tries the handle again, then knocks and says,
"Please, help me."
My uncle is a cop, so I had heard about people using children as a way to get people to open their door before blitz attacking, so I'm pretty sure that's what's happening at this point. I wasn't sure how to handle this situation, so I just said, not even into a phone, "Hi, I think someone is trying to break into my apartment." "Yeah, my address? 123 Fake Street Avenue. Yeah, I'll stay on the line." I then saw a shadow emerge from my bushes. Thankfully, they scooped the kid and ran off. There were 2 people and the kid. People who tried to break into my apartment to rob or kill me. Let's not meet.
Everything had been going according to plan, but a loose line was caught in the well. The sensors on the ship started flashing when they realized that the line was unspooling and had fallen into the event horizon. Making their way through the gravityless ship, they tried to reach the emergency release, but before they could get to it, it tightened and yanked the ship closer to the event horizon. The astronaut, Matthew, reached out and slammed his hand into the release button. The cord broke away from the ship, but it was too late. Everyone inside could feel the strong tug of the black hole. It felt as if everything was stretching to an impossible degree. Then they met the swirling light, which devoured all. In her dream, a blinding light fell upon her, and Jessica woke in the middle of the night with her heart pounding. She took in the dark room, then looked over to the empty spot on the bed next to her. It had been so long since Matthew left for space, though she knew his job was important, to learn as much about the sudden black hole that appeared so close to the solar system. It didn't make the pain of him being gone any better. She tried to lay back down, but her thoughts were racing. After putting her robe on, she stepped out into the patio. Her husband's massive telescope was set up, and at the end of it there was a line which ran inside and hooked up to a computer. It was set to follow the area where her husband was to be for several years. When she investigated it, she could clearly make out the black hole. It shifted the stars around it, making some of them look stretched and skewed. She wished that there was a telescope powerful enough to zoom in and see her husband. A light flickered from inside her bedroom, which caught her attention. A glance around the horizon showed that there weren't any thunderstorms approaching or any nearby lights on, so she returned to looking through the telescope. Matthew knew, and she believed she did deep down as well, that it was very likely he was not going to return home from his voyage, but nonetheless he still promised her that he'd get back to her somehow, someway. The light returned, which blurred her view, and she rose her gaze to see that a light was on in her room. It didn't appear like any of the ceiling lights or lamps, so she returned to her room to investigate. The light poured out of her tall body mirror hung up on the wall. Jessica pinched herself to make sure that she wasn't still dreaming, and felt the pain. When she stepped up to the mirror, she yelped and leaped back when she saw Matthew in the mirror wearing his suit, but without his helmet. He floated in the middle of swirling colors and lights. "Matthew?" she asked. "Yes, dear," he said with a smile. "I can't believe it worked. It's really you." Matthew moved forward to reach out for her, but he was stopped by the other side of the mirror. "How is this possible?" she asked. "We were pulled in," Matthew said. "But you can save us." "How?" Jessica asked, as tears began streaking down her face. "Just pull us out," he said, and put his hand out for her to reach for him. "Where are the others?" she asked, and looked for more of the astronauts in the swirling colors, but couldn't see anyone. "They'll come too," he said, and urged for her to come closer. She was hesitant, but she reached out and touched the mirror. It wasn't glass that she felt, but the gloved hand of her husband. She could feel his weight floating in front of her, and she pulled him. As he came through the mirror, the glass shattered, and she could still see the swirling colors within the frame. She wrapped her arms around Matthew, but she withdrew from him after her hand touched something slimy on his back. Matthew took a few steps towards her as she backed away. Then his body dropped at her feet. A gooey, tentacle-like appendage pulled itself from his back and began moving towards her. The creature it was attached to revealed itself within the frame of the mirror. It appeared like a giant fish with eyes that looked as if it were filled with stars. It opened a mouth filled with serrated teeth. Jessica avoided the tentacle as it attempted to grab her. She jumped about the room frantically until she grabbed her husband's old baseball bat, which he kept in the corner. She swatted at the tentacle as the creature tried squeezing through the frame. She took a final stand and tried using the bat against the creature's face. It roared and hissed with each hit of the bat. As she swung, the frame began to break as some of the hits collided with it. One more solid swing and it broke. A strong force began sucking into the broken frame. Jessica ran and grabbed her window frame as the force grew stronger. The creature wailed as it too tried to grasp something to hold on to. It grabbed her bed and pulled the bed with it as it was pulled into the swirling colors. When the bed cover hit the frame, the force stopped, and both Jessica and her stuff fell to the floor. She searched frantically around the room and found Matthew. He was breathing and his eyes were fluttering. "Matthew," she yelled. "Don't let them in," he coughed. "They'll eat everything." His breathing stopped, and Jessica tried CPR to no avail. As she cradled his body in her arms, she pulled her phone from her pocket and tried calling the other astronauts' spouses and family. "Come on, damn it," she said as she frantically called. But no one was answering.
It is a happy day. I know this because I wake up with the sun smiling on my face. The sky is a brilliant blue. The smell of pancakes wafts upstairs, making my mouth water. I get changed and rush downstairs to golden brown flapjacks drowned in maple syrup. My wife is smiling. My son is smiling. He shovels toast into his mouth and grins as he sprints out the front door to catch the school bus. It is a happy day. Everyone is smiling and greets me with a good morning as I walk past. I take the train with a smile on my face and a spring in my step. No one is frowning. Everyone is smiling because it is a happy day. I greet everyone at work, even the robots. Then I sit down to file papers and enter numbers into my computer. It is boring and monotonous, but it pays well and is a happy job. It is a happy day. Shortly before lunch, my wife suddenly calls me.
It's Philip.
She says shakily when I answer. She's struggling to sound happy.
He's in hospital right now, and they say he isn't looking too good, Harry. He he just collapsed during school today, and his face is all blue. The doctors say he's really sick, Harry.
I'll be right over during lunch. I cannot keep the quaver out of my voice either. See you soon. I hang up and turn back to my computer. Images race through my mind of my son lying on a bed, weak and coughing up blood. Doubts threaten to overwhelm me. Questions come pouring into my mind. What if it is really serious? What if he doesn't get well in time? What if...
Unhappy thoughts detected.
A voice booms out behind me like a megaphone. Then cold metal cuffs click around my arms and I am dragged out of my chair. I look up to see a happy detector robot, or HDR, flashing its red lights, as it always does when it catches an offender. Gripping my desk as they drag me away, everything clatters to the floor as I scream. I'm happy. I swear I am. To no avail, though. Out of the building I am dragged, through the streets and into the police station.
Unhappy person found,
announces the robot cheerfully. The police officers nod grimly and drag me into the room. The dreaded room. The machines move with precision. First, they stretch my mouth into a smile. Then, they dig into my eyes to adjust them to twinkle. Lastly, they insert the tube up my nose to pump in endorphins and happy hormones to get me to smile again. I feel relaxed now. I feel happy. It doesn't matter that Philip is in the hospital. He'll turn out fine. He'll turn out perfect. It is a happy day today. I have a happy life.
A gentle breeze lifts your hair and sweeps your brow. The trees groan and rumble the forest with a baritone boom. A deep green cascades the horizon, intermixed between tall stalks of nature's brunette.
You sway, enchanted by the forest and all she has to offer. The trickle of a nearby stream, cold and refreshing. A serene environment. The croak of a frog calls for your attention as you wonder how you've gotten here. No matter. Why dwell on the how and focus on the now? All around you, apple-sized mushrooms glimmer with a gentle gold, reflecting the sunlight and singing a lullaby of warmth. The forest calls for you. And you answer. You take a step into the brush, twigs snap between your footsteps. The wind guides the nearby branches to paint a canvas of sound that lifts your ears and warms your soul. After a few passing moments, a curious figure catches your vision. A gentle blue orb of careful light approaches. It glows and sparkles with a light effervescence. You stop for a moment, puzzled at the sight of the orb that drifts no higher than 4 feet from the ground. It seems as though the both of you surprised each other. You slowly lift your hand where you would boop the nose of a sleeping puppy. The orb initially leans into the touch, and upon making contact, your finger feels a twinge of energy, much like the small jolt from a static shock. The orb of light seems surprised and ever curious, where she recoils and drifts into a figure-8 loop, playful and peculiar. She produces a cheery twinkle, akin to the chime of a small bell, an innocent giggle. You feel welcomed by this curious spirit, and she drifts around your body, observing your figure and carefully studying you. The playful orb tickles your legs and floats deeper into the forest, gesturing for you to follow. She wants to show you something. You smile and follow with excitement. The orb dances between the trees and through the ferns, playing games and bouncing about. The two of you reach a looming cave, a mouth into nature's underbelly. The darkness billows forth a resounding grasp. A new biome begging for your attention. There are deep, gigantic crystals that undulate a droning radiance. You find yourself feeling eccentric as you take further steps into the mouth of the cave. Your curious friend quells your concern and reassures you of this journey. She gently dances between your fingers and tugs ever so slightly. The tiny jolt of energy tickles the tip of your fingers as you happen upon a wide clearing in the cave. The dark gray walls present an oasis of peculiarity. Upon you is a crystal blue lake of water that reflects the glowing playground of dozens of these gregarious orbs of light. You have never felt more welcomed, as if countless friends are excited by your arrival. The cave twinkles with an orchestra of chimes. These sociable spirits twirl around your body and call you to the water. The cool lake caresses your legs and softens your skin. You feel clean. You feel healthy. You feel refreshed. You juggle the kind orbs between your gentle embrace and they return the play with tiny shocks. After a while, you find yourself remembering your life. It is time for you to go now. These spirits grieve and drift a little sadder as you carefully exit the water. You must say goodbye to the lights. You thank them for playing and they lazily drift towards the top of the cavern. You seem to have upset them. It will be all right, you add. You will come back and play another time. The orbs seem to not like that. Their lethargy grows to sporadic jitters and anger. They don't want you to leave. You apologize for you must go. The orbs swiftly dance around you once more, ushering you to play. Their touch seems desperate, more insistent. The chimes evolve to weeping, shrill and uncomfortable pleading. You feel uneasy. It is time for you to go, you say. These spirits become agitated. You slowly step towards the exit. Their light, gentle pastel has darkened to a cold blue. One of them seems to lightly strike, where your arm surges with a hollow, empty jolt. You glance down in fear as a hole the size of a baseball has evaporated from your body with a simple, ethereal glow. You feel nauseous and sprint towards the cave entrance. Dozens of these delicate gossamer orbs surround your body and attack your flesh. You feel sparks of energy vaporize various aspects of your body until you can walk no longer. You collapse, succumbing to the embrace of the light. You yourself begin to feel light and dainty. You feel simple, and long for the joy and play you experienced just moments ago. A fleeting memory, but a draining lust. Oh, how you wish someone would just play with you.
What a fascinating creature the carrion beetle is. Always appearing where death casts its shadow to feast and reproduce. Then gone as if it were never there. I hadn't even seen one until that day. Now, I don't think I'll ever forget that twisted bright orange and black pattern. It started on maybe a Tuesday. I'm not really sure, honestly. I haven't kept track of time for so long now that I couldn't really tell you how much has passed. I'm sorry, I'm getting way too ahead of myself. From what I do remember, it was a beautiful day. The sun was out and shining so warmly on the grass outside our front window. My wife and I decided to take our daughter to her favorite spot, just down by the beach, not too far from where we live. We all got ready and jumped inside our car. It was packed by the time we had gotten there, and our daughter, Olivia, was beyond her ability to contain her excitement.
Dad, hurry up!
She shouted as she rushed out of the vehicle. Don't go too far, hon. There's a lot of people here. We don't want to lose sight of you. She looked back and nodded happily. We got down to the beach, and immediately Olivia jumped into the water. We set up our little spot not too far from the shore and started to unroll some towels and a beach umbrella. Truly seemed like the perfect day. It must have been maybe half an hour when Olivia ran back to me with a kind of concerned look on her face. "What's wrong, honey?" I asked.
Why is the moon out right now, Dad?
Well, the moon shows itself sometimes during the day. It happens all the time, sweetie. Nothing you have to worry about. Replying with a light-hearted smile, thinking her childish imagination must have gotten the better of her.
But, Dad, why is it so big and bright?
She asked with quite a concern in her tone that I decided to take a look up. And then I saw it. The moon, or I think it was the moon. It was huge. At least 7 times the size it usually would be. And as bright as the sun was, if not brighter. I sat there in awe of this thing. It was then I noticed that most people on the beach had also been staring up at it for quite some time. Everyone's gaze was completely focused. Not a sound could be heard. Then, suddenly, a woman shrieked. The sound easily echoed through the silent air, and everybody turned to see what the alarm was for.
What's happening?
The woman said shakily. Her skin, my God, it was like small festering boils just started to cover the entire surface of her body. She started foaming at the mouth, and then dropped to the ground, shaking like she was having a seizure. Everybody screamed in fear. "We have to get out of here now," I said to Lindsay, with more concern in my voice than I think I've ever had in my life. She firmly agreed, and without hesitation, we stood up and nearly turned around before everyone else got the same idea and frantically started running to find their vehicles. It was complete chaos. They started pushing, pulling, and throwing others out of the way without remorse. Some were getting trampled beneath the feet of those trying to escape the nightmarish scene. There was so much screaming. I had to cover my daughter's ears to try and save her from bursting out into a fit of fear and screaming herself. We somehow managed to make it to our vehicle and get inside. Olivia sat on my wife's lap. There was no time to try and get her into the car seat. Not in this landscape. With a last glance over to the object in the sky, I could see what I could only imagine was the same vision as the darkest night terror could ever look. People in such psychotic fear. Then, everything fell silent. And not just the kind of quietness that comes from the absence of speech, but complete silence. My wife and I looked at each other in complete disarray. I couldn't hear anything, and judging by the look on her face, she couldn't either. Without any time to contemplate what was happening to us, a sharp tone pierced through my ears, and with that came the loss of consciousness. I don't know how much time passed while I was out, but when I awoke, my blood ran cold. I was no longer sitting in my car with my family. In fact, they were nowhere in sight. I had no idea where I was. I looked around to see if there was anything I could recognize. Anything at all. I was in some sort of building, sitting on a well-aged wooden floor. Old stone bricks held together by cement made the walls. but they were covered in vines, moss, and all kinds of different green vegetation. This place obviously hadn't been tended to for years. So how did I end up here? Where even was I? And was I even alive? I had so many questions I knew I wasn't going to get answers to. I looked around and noticed what looked like a window, or at least something I could look out of so I could possibly try and find something that told me where I was. Walking up to the window, I quickly remembered my family. My family, I said loudly to myself. Olivia! Lindsay! Are you guys there? No reply. No anything. Just the faint sounds of wind blowing heavily outside, whatever this building was. I continued towards the window. The way I felt taking that first glance could only be described as the way a baby bird feels when it falls too early from the nest. Completely helpless. What I saw was a dark abyss that stretched on for an eternity. Nothing above, nothing below. Yet light still was shining through at some untraceable point. This building I was in also carried on upwards for another 9 stories above, and 9 stories below the room of which I was standing in. The top peaked in a pyramid shape, much like a clock tower's top would. What is this place? I asked myself. An unfamiliar sound of rustling quickly hit my ears, and I turned around. The sound came from just around the corner at the opposite side of where the window was. I looked around to see a large pile of what looked like meaty flesh covered in black feathers on the ground. It was half covered by shadows and surrounded by blood. The stench of warm, rotting meat hit my nose. I nearly vomited. And against my own better judgment, I slowly made my way over to this dying creature. Maybe it was just some sort of human intuition to try and help something wounded. Or maybe insanity had completely taken over. But step by step, I walked closer to it. As I took my last step, it began to twitch. It shook and convulsed more violently every second I stood there. It began screaming, the most blood-curdling cry I've ever heard in my life. And as the sound of the cry grew to the point of which I thought my eardrums would burst, it shot out of the window and into the never-ending sky. I stood there with goosebumps covering my skin until the faint sound of footsteps approaching grabbed my attention. I eyed my surroundings for somewhere to hide, but the room didn't offer much. In fact, there wasn't any place to hide at all. The only option I really had was to hang out of the window opening. And so that's what I did. Knowing that at any moment I could slip and fall into the dismal black abyss below, I clung to dear life, just hoping whoever came into that room did not notice my hands. The door opened, my heart pumping like I've never felt it before. Adrenaline and fear filled my body as I awaited what was going to happen next.
Something's not right,
a man said to himself. I heard his footsteps walk around the room, as if he knew somebody uninvited had made an appearance.
Something's wrong here. The crow is gone.
I then heard the walking suddenly stop, as if he noticed something, and a feeling of dread ran through every vein like I've never felt before. As quickly as I could blink, I felt hands wrap around each of my wrists and pull me back into the room.
You're not supposed to be here,
he said, holding me above him, his body wrapped in a dark cloth material-made cloak. I couldn't even respond. I was completely frozen in place. His face didn't make sense. I couldn't describe it even if I tried. It was the shape of a human, but nothing human about it. I don't even know how it spoke. There was no mouth. He stood there, clenching my arms in his hands, and without eyes, he made the most intense eye contact anyone has ever made with me in my entire life. Where am I? I was barely able to get the words out of my mouth.
You're far from where you should be,
he replied as he put me onto the ground.
You need to go. Now. He won't like knowing you're here.
Who is he? I asked, with fear resonating through my voice.
Go through that door. Don't stop. Don't look back.
What even is this place? And who are you? I asked, trembling where I stood. He was silent after his last words, but pointed insistently at the same door he came through. I walked towards the door and could see a staircase laid in front of me, just outside the door frame. It went down, very far down. So far down, in fact, that the darkness eventually swallowed any and all light that was faintly coming through the doorway I was standing in front of. This was the only way out, though, so I headed forward. What felt like about 15 minutes or so of walking down steps, and I finally hit the bottom. I couldn't see anything. There wasn't a single shred of light, anywhere. This was beyond any darkness I've ever been in before. Totally encapsulated by the nothingness. The only way I was even able to tell I was going in any sort of right direction was the feeling of a wall on either side of my body. I kept my arms out in front of the walls as well, feeling around for a door, another hall to walk, or anything really. It wasn't very long after walking that something came into reach. It was a wall, maybe a door? I tried to feel around for something to tell me what this dead end might be. Voila! A wheel type of object right in the middle of what I assumed, or at least hoped, was a door. The wheel felt old and rustic. I was beginning to feel like this entire place hadn't had any visitors for quite a very long time. I gripped the wheel tightly with both hands, and using all my force, the wheel moved. Slowly, I turned it clockwise until I felt the door release from the wall. I opened it slowly, not knowing what awaited me on the other side. A bright light shined through, completely eating the darkness that once lay inside that hallway. I was in complete disbelief. This door somehow led me back into my car's driver's seat. It didn't make any sense, but nothing really did anymore. I got into my car seat, still not understanding at all how this door was able to open up to my car. Still parked at the beach, but I got inside. The second I closed the door behind me and turned my head to look back at it, it was gone. In its place reappeared the car door with the same beach scene I looked out at, before whatever just happened to me. The only thing that truly took me back about returning was that the shore was completely empty. No bodies, no massacre. Not even any remnants of blood in the sand. It almost looked like nobody had set foot here for years. The stillness of the scene was almost more unsettling than the bodies I'd seen before I left this place. I tried starting the car engine. No luck. It was then that I noticed that the cars still parked in this parking lot, including my own, had a light film of dust, like they'd just been sitting here for much longer than I thought I'd been gone. I grabbed the handle on the door of my car, pulled it, and stepped out of my vehicle. It was so quiet, so peaceful. Where did everybody go? The psychological toll I'd taken from experiencing everything I had up to this point had started to weigh on me, but there was no way I could give up now. Unsure of what to do, I started walking in the direction that led back to my home. There had to be somebody in one of the neighboring houses, at least I hoped. It was roughly a 20-minute walk back. There was no sign of any movement besides some of the calling of some crows flying above. I walked up to a few houses on the way and knocked on the front doors. None of them answered. I peeked into the windows of the houses to hopefully find something that was alive, but nothing was ever there. Most of the houses looked completely abandoned. I finally got to the front steps of my house and rushed up the 5 steps that led to a small deck and front doors. Reaching my hand out to grab the doorknob, I twisted it and somehow it opened, just left completely unlocked. I walked inside and yelled out, "Lindsay, are you there? Olivia, please answer me, somebody!" I walked around the house aimlessly looking for my wife or daughter, wishing they'd just come out and this nightmare would all be over. Then I got to the master bedroom doors. I opened them and instantly fell to my knees. Tears filled my eyes and my stomach vomited whatever it had inside it from earlier that day. What I saw was the rotten corpses of my wife and daughter laid on the bed, covered in those beetles. After a complete mental breakdown, I got up off my knees and walked over to the bodies. There was a note on the bedside table beside them. This is what it read.
David, if you ever find this note, just know that we never stopped loving you, and hope that it would never have to come to this. That day, you just disappeared. We didn't know what to do. There was so much chaos and terror that we came back home and did our best to live whatever lives we could after that thing came. It took so much from us. Millions, billions of people vanished that day. It was like the rapture was happening. The animals too, and the lakes were completely void of any life. Except those crows. Anything mechanical or electronic stopped working shortly after. There was no way to get out to the city. It would have taken weeks if we tried, and even then, most would have died from starvation along the way. Besides, so many people vanished, and everybody went so crazy that the idea of working together wasn't exactly on the minds of most. Though we were able to make a small system. It's just us now. I miss you so much. It'll be 7 years next week. I hope we meet again. I love you. We love you. Goodbye.
Forlorn. Written and narrated by Stache. How long has it been, I wonder? Is this truly what fate had in store for me? How long has it been, I wonder? Is this truly what fate had in store for me? Every day. Wait, do days still exist? What about months? Years? Centuries? Time doesn't feel still, nor does it flow as I once felt. Every day. Wait, do days still exist? What about months? Years? Centuries? Time doesn't feel still, nor does it flow as I once felt. I've forgotten that sensation of feeling. I recall nothing. I've forgotten the sensation of feeling. I recall nothing. No caress against my skin. No blade, hammer, fist. Plunging, jabbing, colliding. No caress against my skin. No blade, hammer, fist. Plunging, jabbing, colliding. None of it. None of it, I recall. None of it, I recall. What had it been like, I wonder? My mind floats in absence of anything. I see nothing. My sight perceives nothing. No sound graces my ears. Nothing is around that I can touch. I recall it being different. What had it been like, I wonder? My mind floats in absence of anything. I see nothing. My sight perceives nothing. No sound graces my ears. Nothing is around that I can touch. I recall it being different. Once my heart danced with joy, trembled in fear, shook from excitement. I recall not those feelings. No feeling, in fact. Once my heart danced with joy, trembled in fear, shook from excitement. I recall not those feelings. No feeling, in fact. I know I can still feel, at least, I hope I can. I long to fear, of desiring to feel once more. I know I can still feel, at least, I hope I can. I long to fear of desiring to feel once more. I crave the fear, validating that I still exist in a way. If I can still feel, doesn't that mean I'm indeed alive? I crave the fear, validating that I still exist in a way. If I can feel, doesn't that mean that I'm indeed alive? I want the anger to fill me. I feel wronged, but can't feel the injustice I know is true. Why won't it let me? I want the anger to fill me. I feel wronged, but can't feel the injustice I know is true. Why won't it let me? I see, even though no eyes bore from within my head. Within what head? I see, even though no eyes bore from within my head. Within what head? I've been unable to move. Do I have anything left to move? I've been unable to move. Do I have anything left to move? Fearful thoughts fill me. The sensation of a body eludes me. Fearful thoughts fill me. The sensation of a body eludes me. Wafting scents, the aromas of sweet pastries, savory sauces, salivating meats, rotten food, aged alcohol, sweaty fabric, earthy wood, aged stone, dusty floors, sour corpses. What must it have felt like, I wonder? Wafting scents, the aromas of sweet pastries, savory sauces, salivating meat, rotten food, aged alcohol, sweaty fabric, earthy wood, aged stone, dusty floors, sour corpses. What must it have felt like, I wonder? Sound has all but forgotten me. I wish to hear its whisper once more. Sound has all but forgotten me. I wish to hear its whisper once more. Joy, the laughter of comrades, singing tunes of victorious battle, hearty words of inspiration, kindness spoken in abundance, fueling the hope within. Joy, the laughter of comrades, singing tunes of victorious battle, hearty words of inspiration, kindness spoken in abundance, fueling the hope within. Music, every note delicately plucked, mesmerized by the sound of song, letting it carry my mind into another world. Music, every note delicately plucked, mesmerized by the sound of song, letting it carry my mind into another world. Breaths, gasps, moans, sounds of pleasure echoing through the nights, repetitious until it's over, leaving more to be wanted. Breaths, gasps, moans, sounds of pleasure echoing through the nights, repetitious until it's over, leaving more to be wanted. Weeping, wailing from anguish, tears of loss forging sound, crying causing the heart to ache, unbearable, painful. Weeping, wailing from anguish, tears of loss forging sound, crying causing the heart to ache, unbearable, painful, wrathful yelling, paralyzing with fear to the core, anger unpredictable, energy pouring out in clouded judgment of reckless destructive action. What would it sound like, I wonder? Wrathful yelling, paralyzing with fear to the core, anger unpredictable, energy pouring out in clouded judgment of reckless destructive action. What would it sound like, I wonder? I wish I knew how long it has been like this. Memory has been selective with what it hangs on to. I wish I knew how long it had been like this. Memory has been selective with what it hangs on to. The first and the last of crucial memories I have been allowed to recall. The first and the last of crucial memories I have been allowed to recall. Treasure I once took for granted. Treasure I once took for granted. Now more precious than anything I have ever carved, held within my hands. Now more precious than anything I have ever craved, held within my hands. Now more precious than anything I have ever craved, held within my hands. Faces of those familiar, most faded into obscurity. Some faces filling me with glee, some with sadness, pain. Others fill me with anger, fear. Faces of those familiar, most faded into obscurity. Some faces filling me with glee, some with sadness, pain. Others fill me with anger, fear. A glance at a couple filled me with regret, anguish. Regret fills my mind, anger, longing for what once was, to be able to take for granted again what I once had. I crave to feel what I once had. A glance at a couple filled me with regrets, anguish. Regret fills my mind, anger, longing for what once was, to be able to take for granted again what I once had. I crave to feel what I once had. Today is different. I'm no longer alone here, in this void. Someone keeps coming and going. Today is different. I'm no longer alone here in this void. Someone keeps coming and going. Today is different. I'm no longer alone here in this void. Someone keeps coming and going. I know not how, but I can sense them when they are here, and not. I don't know how. I know not how, but I can sense them when they are here, and not. I feel their fear, their confusion, all too familiar to what I had felt arriving here. I feel their fear, their confusion, all too familiar with what I had felt arriving here. An idea forms in my mind. If they can come and go from this place at will, they may be my ticket out of here, this hell. An idea forms in my mind. If they can come and go from this place at will, they may be my ticket out of here, this hell. I want to know what it feels to be alive once more. I want to know what it feels to be alive once more.
You'll never get it toasty like that. Sorry. Couldn't help but notice you've been stoking that fire for hours, and this fellow still looks downright chilly. Oh? It's your first day. Are you a transfer from another circle? You fell yesterday. Are you kidding me? Well, please allow me to show you the ropes. We want everyone to feel comfortable around here. Oh, present humans excluded. Here, bend down and take a look under this tomb. This fire you've started is dandy, but you're barely warming his toes. Could you back up a bit? Share the air. These sealed tombs all have grates on the bottom, and a lot of demons, like you did, intuitively start a little campfire and call it a day. For best results, gather some brimstone and grind it into a fine dust. Now watch what happens when you jab it up there. See? So much better. The dust starts a chain reaction, creating an intense conflagration. And that way, you get a nice, even roast. I'd rather have an intense couple hours than a boring few days. How about you? Here, I'll help you up. My name is Renulus, by the way. Can I have my hand back? Looks like you need a break. Let's get out of here. It's hot as... well, you know. I know a relaxing place that's not too far. You've done such exemplary work, I can't imagine you'll be missed. Not like anyone is going anywhere. Yes. Not like anyone is going anywhere. Maybe that's why I felt so inclined to help you today. It's just nice to see something different around here. You know, we try to innovate, keep things fresh, ensure that every torment is personal and clever. It's the eternity of it. Nothing lasts forever. The most intense pains dull after millennia. And the pressure to create new ideas just gets to me. Perhaps the most ironic torture of all may be our own. But seeing you, I don't know. It sparked something in me. The eagerness in your eyes, the adorable uncertainty. It took me right back to better times. Here we are, the walls of the city. Sometimes one needs perspective. Look at things from the top down. I come up here to think. Don't worry about the guards. They won't bother you as long as I'm here. Have a seat. I don't usually bring anyone up here, but yes, right next to me. Oh, our horns bump together a little bit. I was hoping you'd be interested in... What's that? There's something crawling up the slope. I can't believe it. Attend me. How did he get up this far? And where are his legs? I should be upset that there's some sort of breach, but I can't help but feel excited. A problem to be solved. I have something to do. Send it back. Oh, no, by all means. I insist. Here, just like this. I know you've probably never done anything like this before, so let me guide you. Take your claw like this. And... Yes. Yes. Then eat the heart. That's all there is to it. He'll wake up in his tomb. Well, this has been exhilarating, and I really must thank you. You've done excellent. I think you're a natural. I have probably been missed by now, and will certainly be in trouble. But it is worth it, having made your acquaintance. I trust you can find your way back on your own. See you tomorrow.
Hey, sunshine. Are you having trouble sleeping? I could help if you want. So, I'm going to help you fall asleep by reading to you for an hour, okay? And I'm going to read the series Infinite Dolores by Garnet and Opal. It's a 28-part series, but I'm going to read for an hour, so we'll see how many chapters we get through, okay? So, I want you to relax. Breathe. Listen to the rain. Relax. Okay. Let's begin. Infinite Dolores. The Strange Case of Dolores Cranon. Chapter 1. Dolores. Dolores Cranon came into Blessed Mother complaining of severe stomach aches. After testing, it was found that she had an enormous tumor in her abdomen, so large that it was pushing on her diaphragm and making it difficult for her to breathe. What she had thought was middle-aged spread, and weight gain on top of it was a tumor. She lay on the gurney in the emergency room feeling stupid. More tests were needed. so they kept her overnight. Just before she was about to be released, one of the team of doctors asked for another scan. The tumor had grown in those 10 hours between the first scan and this second one. Its growth was not incremental. The tumor was a third larger, and the pressure on her internal organs was excruciating. She was given pain medication, and in less than an hour was being rushed into an operating room. The oncology surgeon made sure to tie off all the blood vessels leading to the tumor. The circulatory vessels were numerous. He then removed the tumor from Dolores Crannon's belly and weighed it. It weighed 45.2 pounds. He went back to his patient to start suturing her back together. The surgery had been long, but there were no complications. One of the nurses picked the tumor up by lifting the bloody plastic upon which it lay. She intended to discard it as medical waste, until it wailed. Half of the team rushed to the tumor, while the other half worked feverishly to close Dolores up. The tumor had no external features except an irregular wrinkle across one end. As they watched, the wrinkle opened up into a primitive mouth, and it wailed again. The Strange Case of Dolores Crannon, Chapter 2, The Tumor. Scans showed primitive lungs and a heart. The tumor did not appear to have any sensory system nor digestive system. A nurse and the anesthesiologist refused to have anything to do with testing the tumor or handling it. Whatever it is, it's not human, and I'm washing my hands of it, the anesthesiologist said. It's an aberrant bit of medical waste, that's all. One of the nurses asked, "What do we do with it? How do we feed it?" "It has a mouth, but no throat, no stomach, no rectum. It can't do anything with food, but it needs something to live." Hospital administration came back with a temporary solution: intravenous feeding. Another nurse spoke up. "How are we going to do that?" More scans were taken, and doctors were stunned to find blood vessels running all through the tumor. "How did we miss them?" one of them asked. They compared the newer scans with the previous ones. The blood vessels were new. Only one nurse had the guts to put in an IV line, during which time the tumor never stopped wailing. 10 minutes after the line was in, the nurse was sent home. She couldn't stop shaking and throwing up. The tumor grew, getting larger every hour, getting larger with every bag of nutrition hooked up to the IV line. It never gained any more systems or complex organs. No liver, no kidneys, no bones, no nerves or brain. It never gained any facial features, muscles or limbs. Researchers found a rudimentary larynx just inside the mouth, which helped to explain the wailing. They had missed the larynx earlier because the scans of its lungs stopped short of the mouth, short enough to miss the small larynx. At 82 pounds, the tumor stopped growing. At times, its mass would jiggle. When it wasn't wailing, there was a constant, quiet mewling. The mouth had formed the tendency to remain in an open position. Other than wiggling and making sound, the tumor was inert. The temperature of its nearly skin-like surface slightly warmer than room temperature. Only a handful of nurses were willing to tend it. Most objected due to religious reasons, even though The Monsignor assured the staff that the tumor was human and had a soul. Christ encourages us to take care of our lesser brothers and sisters. What is this poor suffering soul, if not one of our lessers? He said. A few heads nodded, but only those 4 nurses remained willing to care for the tumor. As days and weeks went by, that small group of nurses became more and more isolated from the rest of the nursing staff, as if their care of the tumor made them somehow unclean or contagious. Genetic tests were performed. Not only did the tumor possess 46 chromosomes lined up nearly in 23 pairs, they were all X chromosomes. Technically, the tumor was female. Not surprisingly, its DNA was a 98% match to Dolores Cranon. The tumor carried the same genetic markers for mother and father, the same predisposition to heart disease and diabetes, which the tumor could never develop since it didn't have a pancreas. Perhaps that 98% match to Dolores was a bit surprising to the team. The remaining 2% didn't match anything on Earth. One day, a nurse noticed something as she was hooking up another bag of TPN nutrition. The tumor's normal pinkish color was muted, and there was a bulge on one side at the opposite end from the mouth. She noticed it on the chart, which was listed as Cranon X. Hours later, the nurse who relieved her noted that the bulge was considerably larger. Despite the late hour, the team of researchers met at the hospital only to find that the mass on the tumor was nearly a quarter of the size of the tumor itself. Scans of the tumor revealed that a mass was growing inside it. The tumor had a tumor. The Strange Case of Dolores Cranon, Chapter 3, The Second Tumor. Dolores Cranon's tumor had taken on a sickly gray color, its lower contour bulging out until the outer layer was shiny and slick to the touch. 2 days after the discovery of the tumor within the tumor, the research team became once again a surgery team. There was no anesthesia, just a quick, shallow incision. Ichor followed, and the second tumor wriggled its way out of the first. The team stood there, uncertain what to do. The second tumor had limbs. It looked like an enormous flesh-colored gingerbread man, its arms and legs ending in rounded nubs. Its head, a round blob with 3 slits as facial features. It was much smaller than the original tumor, only 36 pounds. Its limbs thrashed while the 2 smaller slits in its face flared open. The longer slit gaped wide, and the tumor began to squall, bashing the sheet beneath it as it flailed. The team stood looking at it until a nurse said, "There is no explaining any of this, but I know a baby when I see one." She swaddled the tumor in another sheet and held it while another nurse looked for a nursery table large enough to fit it. In short order, the second tumor was washed up, diapered, swaddled again, and set under a light in a bin on a table. Left alone on the surgical table, the first tumor died. When members of the team returned to it, they found it inert. It was only when one of them touched the tumor to start stitching the incision closed that she was startled by the temperature. The tumor was stone cold and much more solid to the touch. They all poked it with their gloved fingers. The oncologist spoke first. "We need to contact administration. In the meantime, this needs to be taken to the morgue." Administration contacted Dolores Cranon, who had known nothing of the tumor's development. She gagged and wept through the phone call. In the end, it was her decision to hold a funeral for the tumor. When asked what name to be used for the funeral and gravestone, Dolores couldn't decide. She asked what the hospital had called the tumor. When told its name was X. Cranon, she cried again. Christine. Her name is Christine, she said finally. She cried one more time when the administrator told her that the hospital was paying all funeral expenses. Monsignor Latour would be the celebrant at funeral mass. It was a cold, bright, windy morning. The only people present at Christine Cranon's funeral were Dolores, the Monsignor, and the members of Christine's team. The only one who cried was Dolores. She was now convinced that she had lost a baby, a severely deformed baby. The Monsignor spoke of the Lord's ever-present mercy, easing the suffering of the innocent. After the service, one of the nurses hugged Dolores, who was still overcome by the situation. Christine's baby is doing fine, she told Dolores in a comforting voice. Dolores hit the ground in a dead faint. The nurse who told Dolores of the tumor's tumor was let go that afternoon, reducing the nurses on the team to 3. The team was advised by administration to tell no one of the second tumor and to go to administration if any questions were raised. Scans and x-rays showed the team that the second tumor had bones, a digestive system, a heart, and kidneys. Primitive muscle formations gave the tumor gross motor movement. Its DNA was a 99% match to the first tumors, and a 97% match to Dolores. Members of the team split into 2 groups. One group continued to refer to it as a tumor. The other group called it she, her, and infant. They were all, however, agreed on one thing. There was no explanation of how either the first or second tumor originated. The oncologist said in solemn tones, "This is new ground for all of us." A nurse brought some small t-shirts from home to dress the second tumor, and the name on the chart was Cranon X2. The Strange Case of Dolores Cranon. Chapter 4. X2. The second tumor grew less quickly than the first, and it developed more specialized cells. There was soft skin on its outer surface, mucosa lining the slits in its face and rectum, sweat glands in its armpits and on its forehead, a fine layer of hair on the very top of its head. Scans showed a small button-like knob at the top of the spinal column, and the rest of the skull was like a large sinus with thin baffles of bone channeling the air. Its esophagus led to a rudimentary stomach. Its trachea split before reaching the lungs. Dolores Cranon visited the tumor every other week or so. The team watched her carefully, suspecting a psychotic break. However, Dolores offered the tumor no violence and kept her bi-weekly visits well under 10 minutes. The team put in surveillance cams and mics. Hospital administrators hired more people to be on the team. The 2 newest hires were there to monitor recordings. Administration was alerted when the tumor started to coo. Sensory tests were done, suspecting that the tumor was reacting to touch since it was blind and deaf. It did not respond to pricking, tickling, heat, cold, or light impact. It was fed intravenously, but one of the nurses brought in baby food after clearing it with the oncologist, who was the lead on the tumor team. And the tumor would smack its mouth slit, but did not coo. It cooed only when Dolores visited it, but she didn't seem to notice that. Her visits were short, as if obligatory. In many respects, the second tumor was like a very large infant of a very young age. It did not have any control over its bladder or rectum. It flailed its appendages almost at random. Like an infant, it responded to cuddling or skin-to-skin contact. 2 of the 3 nurses were willing to test this. As long as it was cuddled, the tumor cooed, not unlike a pigeon. There was a brief wail when it was put back in its bin. During Dolores's next visit, several members of the team followed. As soon as Dolores stepped through the door, the tumor cooed. "What's her name?" asked a nurse. "Josie." "I'm going to put that on her chart right now," the nurse said. "I don't like calling her X." After regarding the tumor for a few moments, listening to it coo, Dolores asked, "Can I hold her?" The team had Dolores sit in a chair because the tumor was approaching 40 pounds. They brought a regular flannel blanket folded in half and swaddled the tumor. As Dolores sat and rocked her upper body, holding on to the tumor hugged her back and cooed. After that visit, Dolores's visits became daily. The Strange Case of Dolores Cranon, Chapter 5. The Next Formation. Dolores's voice cried out over the intercom. "There's something wrong with Josie." Her voice got shriller and more panicked. "Do something." A nurse on the team responded, rushing into the room to see the tumor lying in its bin, its diaper off, and Dolores pointing at the side of, for lack of a better term, the tumor's belly. Off to one side, there was a pinkish bump about the size of a small grape. Using a touch thermometer, the nurse measured the warmth of the area. The reading over the bump was no higher or lower than readings taken all over the tumor. "What is it?" Dolores wanted to know. "I can't really say. I have to call the doctor." The oncologist cut short a staff meeting to examine the tumor. He ordered scans and blood tests. He told Dolores that it was too soon to tell what was going on. Later, he told the team, "I think we're catching this one early. We're going to take scans every 8 hours. I think we're going to see how these tumors are forming." The first scans showed a small growth about 4 millimeters across, less than the diameter of a pencil. It was unclear if the growth was attached to an organ or to the inner wall of the abdomen. There were already numerous blood vessels snaking through the area, feeding the growth. The tumor vocalized and moved as it normally did. Pressure on the small growth elicited no response. One of the nurses said, "We're going to have to start calling them by name. Tumor and growth don't really describe what is going on." The team didn't like any of the recommendations any of them came up with. X2 and X3 were too easily switched. Mother and embryo were too emotional, and embryo would probably have to change to fetus at some point, and then to infant. Patient and tumor were better. Except that the original tumor wasn't a patient, and therefore the second tumor wasn't a patient, and all of them were tumors to begin with. Dolores called the second one Josie, offered one voice. It was an odd way to refer to a patient. A subject of research and study, but it was acceptable. What about Eve? Asked another. Response on this suggestion was divided. Too religious, too biblical. No. Just no. Finally, someone suggested, what about naming them like hurricanes or storms? Since this one is Josie, the next would start with K, like Caitlin. No one knew what the future would bring, so an alphabetic system would at least allow room for growths, as one of the more comedic members of the team expressed it. Dolores left the hospital only after she was gently told to come back tomorrow. We'll have more information then, the nursing assistant said. The next day, no one had more information for Dolores. The Strange Case of Dolores Cranon. Chapter 6. Caitlin. During each daily visit, Dolores checked the bulge on Josie's side. It seemed to her that the growth was only getting larger, and no one would tell her what it was. She laid her hand against it. Already, the bulge was nearly as long as her pinky finger. The next day, it was a tiny bit longer. Not very much at all, except that it was that tiny bit bigger. Maybe 1/16 of an inch. The following day, she brought in her dressmaker's measuring tape in her purse. She typed 2 1/4 inches by 1 3/8 inches in a note on her cell phone. The oncologist was adamant that no one on the team talk to Dolores except himself. I want to make sure that we are giving her one version of the truth and only one version. That means that we have to limit the information. Remember, Dolores is not just the original patient, she is my patient. I don't want her to suffer mentally or emotionally due to things that are causing professionals no small amount of concern. So, if she approaches you, politely let her know I will speak with her. Another member of the team, one of the most recent admissions, had left, citing time conflicts with his classes. Alternate hours were suggested to him, but he declined, never actually stating the obvious. He wanted no more to do with this. Stress was starting to show on all members of the team. Stress from long hours, stress from caring for a body that could not assist in its own care, stress from the need for discretion, stress from personal beliefs, stress from colleagues and rumors, stress from being around something that made no sense constantly, stress from just being around something so alien. Every member of the team understood what the oncologist meant. If they, who were trained and had so much experience, were stressed almost to breaking, what would an untrained person do? Later, one of the nurses remarked, "We're going off the deep end, and no one knows where the bottom is, or if there even is a bottom." After nearly 2 weeks of slow increase in size, the growth known as Caitlin suddenly picked up its rate of growth. Scans already showed Caitlin's stomach and heart, as well as limbs and a mass in the skull. Under his breath, the oncologist said, "Eerie. It almost looks like an embryo." To him, it looked like that short span of development when an embryo becomes a fetus. He brought a maternal fetal specialist into the team. At first, the specialist disregarded the team's input, especially the more emotional, intuitive input. But after reviewing the entire medical record, starting with Dolores Cranon's records, she let the team know she was willing to listen. From that point on, the maternal fetus specialist put in more hours than the other members of the team. She ordered ultrasounds done every 6 hours, and more team members were hired to assist her, all medical professionals with obstetric and perinatal experience. We're going to proceed as if this were any ectopic pregnancy going to term, she told them. The oncologist again cautioned that discretion was paramount. All discussion of Josie or Caitlin was to be kept within the team. Not only was he the go-to for communicating to Dolores, he was also the only one to liaise with administration. Caitlin's growth spurt continued and increased. The team estimated her weight at 5 pounds. In 24 hours, she gained another pound. In another 24 hours, she gained 1 pound, 4 ounces. Dolores was not allowed to visit. Because Caitlin's size was causing stretch marks on Josie's skin, and Dolores got emotionally upset over each new perceived, covertly measured difference in Josie's appearance, to the point she became combative when told to leave the room. Although no one on the team mentioned it, they noticed that Josie stopped cooing when Dolores raised her voice. None of them wanted to admit that they each suspected Josie had some awareness of what was going on around her. "I have a right to see my baby," she exclaimed. The oncologist was called, and he met with Dolores in the chapel. Dolores continued to come to the hospital daily, and he met her in the chapel every time. He invited the Monsignor to meet with them. Although he wouldn't divulge his feelings to Dolores or any of the team, the Monsignor had a very strong feeling that Caitlin's origin was not unlike Christ's, immaculate. Likewise for Josie and Christine, rather than demonic, their origin seemed divine to him. God is unfathomable, he thought. It seemed to him that each child, for he could not regard them as tumors, was a step closer to a perfect vessel, but he had so many questions. Would the last one bear an angel's essence? Would she be God's word made flesh again? And that is what was meant by the promise of the second coming. At the thought of that possibility, the Monsignor found himself shaking his head. No one considered that the second time Christ comes, Christ might choose the form of a woman. Or, if someone had considered that, he had not read or heard of it. The Monsignor asked to be a member of the team and was permitted to join them. Although he didn't need an introduction, the oncologist officially introduced him to the team. And from then on, the Monsignor attended most team meetings and viewed much of the research. He also met with Dolores, and they prayed together. The Strange Case of Dolores Cranon, Chapter 7. Meeting Caitlin. Josie had stopped growing at 47 pounds, and now the bulge on her side went from the middle of her leg to her armpit. Their combined weight was 77 pounds. The skin over the bulge was darkening. It was nearly purple now, and the obstetric staff on the team were on call 24 hours. No one had any way of predicting when Caitlin should be removed from Josie. Dolores was getting more and more insistent about visiting Josie. She caused a scene several times. The first time it happened, the oncologist called security after warning her that he would do that. Upon seeing 3 security officers approach her, Dolores stopped shouting and pointing, trying to push past staff. Instead, she sobbed and then left under her own power. After that, the mention of security was enough to calm her tantrums. At wit's end, she turned to the Monsignor and begged for his intercession. True to his word, the Monsignor approached the oncologist and made a good argument for letting Dolores know what was happening with Josie. Neither Blessed Mother nor her parent corporation, Sisters of Goodwill, want the exposure of a mother telling the media that she is not allowed to see her child, especially when it is this child. Do you want to explain to the media how Josie came to be? Or Caitlin? Or why they haven't heard of this until now? The oncologist countered. How are we going to explain Caitlin to Dolores? It was already a stretch for her to accept Josie, who was the growth on her first tumor. Christine, the Monsignor said. Yes, I remember Christine, as does Dolores. I think she can grow to accept Caitlin if it is all explained to her. She is genuinely concerned about Josie. She thinks she will be able to take Josie home at some point, so we need to let her know everything. She needs to understand that Josie can never go home with her. Otherwise, we will see her on the evening news and all over the internet. The oncologist made an appointment for Dolores to come and talk with him and the Monsignor. At the last minute, he asked a few members of the team to attend, so that they could give input on the care they were giving Josie and Caitlin. The maternal and fetal specialists asked to be included, so it was a large group of people that Dolores met. Uncowed, she asked to see Josie that day. The meeting took all morning, with some team members popping out and back in. They had so much to tell Dolores, and some of it needed repetition because it seemed like she wasn't putting all the information together. When she finally grasped everything they said, she sat back and stared at the team. So, you don't know if Josie is a tumor or a person? Not really, do you? And you don't know how all of this started, do you? And it looks like Josie is going to have either a tumor or a person, a baby. And we didn't talk about her much, but you still don't know if Christine was a tumor or a person. We're in the middle of a mystery. The oncologist replied, You're right. Everything you said is right. Why me? She asked. Why now? No one had the answer to either of those questions, but they didn't have long to think about it, because they were called to rush to Josie's room. One of the nurses was out in the hall, waving at them to hurry. Since no one stopped her, Dolores rushed right along with them. The first team member to reach Josie's side witnessed it all. A puckered line appeared along Josie's side, starting high in her left armpit and running down to where she should have had a knee. The line reddened and became puffy, swelling very quickly. Josie's limbs flailed, thudding loudly against her bedclothes and bin, and her usual mewling sound became shrill, more like a scream. In the middle of the puffed area, a dark red line appeared. The dark red line split open. Josie stopped flailing, and the mewling sound was almost breathy. Dolores was sobbing quietly. Caitlin crawled out of Josie's body, her fingers grabbing the blankets, her feet kicking to get free. The Strange Case of Dolores Cranon, Chapter 8, The Sisters. At what the team referred to as her delivery, Caitlin weighed 24 pounds. She had fingers and toes, a face, joints in her arms and legs. Apart from her size, she looked as close to a human baby as a doll might. Every feature present was not quite defined or developed enough. She had outer ears, but no external meatus or earlobes. She had nostrils, but they were separate tubes not joined on each side of a nasal lobule. She had lips, but the skin on them was as thick as the surrounding skin. No vermilion border, no vermilion zone. The skin on her lips was featureless, therefore no lip prints. On each hand, she had 4 fingers with one joint in the middle, but no fingernails or prints. The thumb on each hand was fixed, jointless. It was the same for her toes. The 4 smaller toes had one joint, no nail or prints, and the large toe was fixed and lacked joints. She had light brown hair on the top of her head, but no eyebrows or eyelashes. Her eyelids were smooth with an epicanthic fold, and the eyes themselves were small and did not track. Instead, they stayed in a fixed position. She had small buttocks, but the front of her pelvic area was completely featureless. Like a doll, she had most of the basic features of a human, but details were missing or twisted. The maternal fetal specialist said in an aside comment to one of her team, "Caitlin is 100 different birth defects rolled into one person. Every time I think we have fully described her condition, I realize there is one more detail to add that never combines with the other features. Unlike a usual human body or baby doll, Caitlin had teeth, 6 of them, 2 up, 4 down. Behind them was a smooth palate over the oral cavity and a small pointed tongue on the floor of the cavity. Also, unlike a baby, Caitlin could form syllables, primarily stop consonants like B, D, or G, and the sonorant M, followed by the low back vowel A. The first speech therapist invited to the team declined, but her junior colleague joined and enthusiastically started to catalog Caitlin's speech abilities and devise a plan of treatment. Even more so than Christine or Josie before her, Caitlin was scanned and photographed from every aspect over her entire body and head, inside and outside. Testing showed she was a 99% genetic match to Josie and 95% match to Dolores, which stunned the team. Administration brought in more specialists to the team, geneticists, early development, pediatric dentists. Caitlin became the best-kept secret at Blessed Mother, occupying a room in a wing that limited access to only team members and select administration staff. At first, Josie was kept in the same room with Caitlin, but administration made the decision to give them separate rooms. Dolores was now granted permission to visit each of them, but her emotions were raw and volatile. When holding Josie, Dolores cried, sometimes sobbing deeply, at which point Caitlin would show signs of distress. Josie's heart rate was getting increasingly slower, her temperature cooler, her movements weak and voice reedy. Her usual color muted to a grayish pink. It didn't take a professional to see that Josie was dying. Dolores split her visits between Josie and Caitlin, often bringing toys, flowers, or clothing. Caitlin received toddler-sized clothing, and Josie received t-shirts that covered her to the middle of her legs. Dolores often referred to them as each other's sister. Staff looked on during these visits. One of them said, "I don't want to be here when Josie dies." Another replied, "None of us do." They had all seen patients die, siblings and children die, but there was something so different about the Cranon deaths. Perhaps it was that there were so many unknowns and unforeseeables. Perhaps it was the closeness of the team itself. Perhaps it was that while one of them thrived so rapidly, the other declined just as rapidly. Administration looked on as well. The number of surveillance cams were doubled. One of the concerns discussed was how much they were willing to spend on another funeral. Josie's. Another was how to continue keeping the media out. Yet another was how much more they would spend on any subsequent tumors, growths, odd births, since the team was expanding and the diagnostic tests increasing. So far, Blessed Mother had kept knowledge of the 3 tumors from the Sisters of Goodwill, and there was growing disquiet that withholding that information could turn into career wreckers for the people involved. As expected, the chief financial officer was interested in the expenses, while the CEO was concerned about optics. But both agreed on this. Blessed Mother was running out of time. The Strange Case of Dolores Cranon, Chapter 9. Mother and Child. Holding Josie after she passed, Dolores keened, her heart shattered. An orderly gently convinced Dolores to let go of her so that she could be cared for. He reminded Dolores that her other child needed her and led her crying to Caitlin's room. "Dolores," Caitlin said. It was the closest she could get to pronouncing Dolores' name. She was, at this point, 6 days old. As Dolores held Caitlin and rocked, Caitlin made a small sound. Still crying, Dolores kissed her head. "I love you. I love you." Dolores wiped tears from Caitlin's cheeks. They held on to each other without saying anything more. Many of the team doubted that Caitlin was actually speaking, thinking that she was simply parroting sound. The speech therapist strongly disagreed. She never says "devoir" to anyone but Dolores. She's obviously made the connection between the sounds she hears, the sounds she makes, the person's name, and the person. How much more do you need? Privately, one of the assistants said, "My cockatiel says hello, but I don't think he's actually talking to me. You know, greeting me." The nurse he was speaking to replied, "I wouldn't be surprised if Caitlin started reading today. You can't compare her to a bird. You can't compare her to a baby, either. She's growing, but not like a baby. And whether or not she understands language, she is making sounds babies don't make. She has a toddler's language, a young child's shape. Her head is too small in proportion to her body for a baby, and she is way too alert. She's some weird mix-up of toddler, child, and adolescent." If Dolores overheard any of the comments made, she never let them know. Instead, she concentrated on caring for Caitlin, brushing her hair and putting bows in it, dressing her. In a way, many were impressed by her ability to accept Caitlin's oddities, but any who knew a parent with a special needs child found Dolores to be very similar. Dolores was rolling with all the special quirks, accepting them and loving Caitlin. The maternal fetal specialist said to the oncologist, "It's going to be tough when she finds out that Caitlin isn't going home with her. But Caitlin can't go home with her." The oncologist shook his head. "No. It's not just a simple thing of learning to care for Caitlin. No one can say for certain whether or not the tumor process has stopped. What happens if Caitlin develops growth like herself? What if that starts to happen in a way that hasn't presented before and Dolores doesn't recognize it for what it is? What if Caitlin gets ill or injured, and Dolores takes her for urgent or emergent care? How will they be able to help Caitlin when they don't know anything about her? I don't know Dolores' insurance situation, but if she does have insurance, how will she get Caitlin on it? She can't even prove Caitlin exists because there isn't a birth certificate. Caitlin wasn't born. Will Caitlin go to school? And when would she start? who could assess her to place her in a class. Issues increase exponentially the moment Caitlin goes out any door of this hospital. And the media, the specialist said, in a near whisper. She thought of the circus it would create if word of Caitlin slipped out. Yes, and admin. We can't forget admin. We can't list all the issues Caitlin will face because we don't know enough about her processes. But we will be brought to task if anything goes wrong. Together, the doctors looked at mother and child.